Morning, everyone. This is Arnold Weinfeld with Michigan State University Institute for Public Policy and Social Research. All are muted at this point in time, and we'll get started in about 10 minutes or so. We'll give people a chance to sign on. Thanks for being with us this morning. Welcome again, everyone, to the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research Legislative Staff Training. We will get started in a few moments. Thanks for being here. Okay, we'll get started. Welcome, everyone, to the third and final session of our legislative staff trainings for 2022. My name is Arnold Weinfeld. I'm Associate Director at Michigan State University's Institute for Public Policy and Social Research. We are a unit in the College of Social Science. I'm sure many of you are familiar with our institute and the programs that we operate, including these staff trainings, our public policy forums, our legislative leadership program, Michigan political leadership program, and our Michigan applied public policy research program. So welcome again to, as I said, this third and final session of 2022. We'll be continuing these as we move into 2023. A few housekeeping items. If you would like to ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand or place your question in the chat box. If you could start by introducing yourself in the chat box, that would be great. Please put your name and office and your title in there so we know, so folks can see who is with us here today. Before we get started with our first session, a couple of thank yous. Sessions like this are only possible with collaboration and teamwork. And so I'd like to thank our on-campus partners in MSU Extension and the Office of Government Affairs. And then, of course, our partners in the legislature, House and Senate leadership offices for their support, and also the support and work of the House and Senate Business Office, who is part of our team in figuring out what we're going to present and in getting the word out to you all. So again, I do appreciate, we all appreciate you being here with us today. We hope today's sessions are informative for you. They include our first presenters to talk about broadband efforts in the state of Michigan. And then we'll have two professional development sessions, one on time management and the last one on resume building and interview skills. So let's get started. Continue to please put your name, introduce yourself in the chat box. But along the way here, we'll get started. Our first panel, as I noted, features a discussion on broadband initiatives in the state of Michigan. I'm very pleased to have with us here today two key people in those efforts. The first is Dr. Johannes Bauer. Dr. Johannes Bauer was appointed as the Quello Chair for Media and Information Policy and the Director of the Quello Center at Michigan State University in August 2018. He previously served as the chairperson of the Department of Media Information and has been trained as an engineer and economist, holding master and PhD degrees in economics. While at MSU, he's also held appointments as a visiting professor at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, the University of Konstanz in Germany, and most recently, the University of Zurich. Much of his research centers on policy issues critical to the Quello Center. Our second presenter, along with Dr. Bauer, is Joseph Sawaski. Joe is currently the president and CEO of Merit Networking. I'm sure Joe will talk a bit more about Merit, but for those of you not familiar, Merit is a nonprofit corporation that's actually governed by Michigan's public universities. Merit owns and operates the nation's longest running regional research and education network. Today, Merit provides high-performance networking, cybersecurity solutions, and community building services to nearly 400 higher education, K-12, library, governmental, community, and healthcare organizations, among others. And Merit is a key component in the build-out of Michigan's broadband network. So with that, let us begin. And I think I am introducing Johannes first. Johannes, you should be able to share your screen.
Yes, thank you, Arnold, for the kind introduction. Okay, does everybody see the full slide?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm glad this is on Zoom. I happen to be in Washington, D.C., where a lot of discussions are going on currently on the topic that we'll address here on broadband policy. Joe and I will share the presentation. I will briefly talk about the Quello and I'll give a brief overview of the importance of the issue. It's hard to escape the discussions on the importance of broadband. And we have known about those issues maybe for 25, 30 years, it seems, and not been able really to align policies at the federal and state level in ways that would address the problem effectively. And now we're at a point in time, I think, where the chances are the best they have been in 30 years. And then it will give you a little context, and then Joe will talk about one specific project that is unfolding as we speak, or is at its beginning, Project Moonlight, that will really help provide better connectivity for the state of Michigan. But before we go into this, let me say a few things about the Quello Center, because it is probably one of the secrets that MSU has that very few people know about. The Quello Center is named after former FCC Commissioner and Chair Jim Quello, who used to be an MSU alumnus, and his wife Mary B. Quello. When Jim retired in 1998, Michigan State University established a center in his honor. He has the distinction to his name that he was the second longest serving commissioner at the Federal Communications Commission. In fact, he's ex aequo with somebody else. So there's actually, you could say, second or third. 23 and a half years. There's only one commissioner, Robert Lee, who served for 28 years that had a longer tenure. He was actually appointed as a Democrat by Richard Nixon and reappointed by subsequent the Republican and Democratic administrations. And Jim was a bridge builder. He was one of those rare political animals, at least nowadays it seems, who are capable to work across aisles and really find sort of reasonable, workable solutions in the public interest. And our center has tried to maintain that spirit. We try to be a voice of reason that uses research to inform policy and find workable solutions. Broadband is one of those examples, right? That should not be influenced by partisanship. It's a non-partisan problem that the state faces, and there are solutions to the problem. Maybe we vary slightly in terms of what we think the best solution is, but I think it's feasible to address this issue. Our work really spans a wide range of things, and I don't really want to belabor this. I invite you to go to maybe qual.msu.edu to see more, but we do mainly research. Broadband, digital equity, inclusion is one of our big areas of research, but we also examine social impacts of technology. We talk about digital transformation, a big topic nowadays, right, where we believe that digital technology will really transform fundamentally the way we work and live. And we do we do work on the regulation of the digital economy. Issues such as, should we break up Google? Should we split Facebook? How should we regulate them to align their operations better with social interests? And we issue policy briefs, we do workshops, we do public lectures. We invite you to really sign up to our mailing list and maybe be part of those, at least occasionally. All our work is in the public domain, so you can find it easily, and please do not hesitate contacting me if we can be of any help for you. Now let's go to the issue of broadband. I did not want to belabor this, but just to let you know that broadband, when we talk about broadband, we're talking about high-speed connectivity technologies, and there are multiple options that are available. They range from mobile options to fixed wireless options, such as Wi-Fi would be one of them, to satellite communications, and also cable, fiber, and DSL, which are fixed technologies. They're either aerial cables or underground cables, and DSL runs on the old telephone network. Without really going into details, the main difference between traditional connectivity technology and broadband is that it's a technology that is always available, it's always on, and it supports capacity that really enables users to use the cutting edge technologies. Now, what broadband has changed over time. Initially, we thought about broadband as 200 kilobit per second download speed, and the motivation there was it's the capacity you need to flip your online page as quickly as you would flip a book page. Now, later on, it was 2 megabits per second download, and now we stand at 25 megabit per second download as the official definition, and 3 megabit per second upload speed. But increasingly, we realize that users are not only users anymore, but they're also producers of information. And so the vision currently is to maybe move to 100 megabit per second upload download speeds, and these would then support sort of the cutting edge applications that we envision, for example, in telehealth, in virtual reality education. That could be both in our regular K-12 school system, but also for continuing education, upskilling. For example, in many apprenticeships currently, we see the use of virtual reality technology to teach students about safety protocols for welders, for example, just to give you one very down-to-earth example. And before they even go into the workshop, they learn about safety, get certified using virtual education frameworks. To do those things effectively, we need the supportive technology. My guess is, and my forecast is, that the 100 will also not be a robust framework for the future, because it's a complementary synergistic system of innovation. The better connectivity we have, the more applications we can develop, the more applications we have, the more connectivity we demand. So it's really a cycle, and we need to find policies and market frameworks to really support this. Michigan currently is not doing all that well. I mean, it ranks number 33 in the state, in the nation, and as you can see in this slide, at least you can get a hint. Connectivity across the state is very uneven, even if you take into account population distribution and so forth. But the darker areas, the darker shaded areas, show you, using that threshold of 100 megabit per second download speeds, show you unserved areas, and you see that there is, in the southwest, in the mitten and in the thumb area, in the forefinger area up north, and certainly in the Upper Peninsula, there's a lot of demand to improve connectivity. These connectivities have two reasons. One is that serving some of these areas is expensive, so it's a high cost proposition, and if you have low population density, the cost per user is high. So that's an obstacle to commercial business models. But there's also a second reason, and that's actually in terms of the number of people that are affected. That's the larger problem, and that is that many residents, even if they live in areas that have connectivity, cannot afford it. And not having connectivity has serious implications. And I don't want to, again, go into detail here, but give you a high-level understanding of what those implications are and how wide-reaching they are. And one of the studies that we did together with Mirrored Network, and it was really a fantastic partnership that would not have been able without their help, and then the collaboration of 3 intermediate school districts in Michigan. One in the Upper Peninsula, one in the southwest of the state, and then one in the east of the state. We looked at the effects of variations in connectivity on school accomplishments, and the term that was then used in the public discussion was the homework gap, right? So the idea that if you're not connected, you have a hard time finishing your homework. If you can finish your homework, you have lower grades and lower opportunities. And our findings show that this is true, but the problem is much more complicated and has many more dimensions and many more repercussions. And so one of the findings was that connectivity, as we expected, although we didn't expect such a grass difference, connectivity is better in urban areas, especially in suburban areas. But 47% of rural students in our 3 school districts were without high-speed home access to the internet at home. And this has multiple repercussions. For one, we see a clear association with the grade levels that students can achieve between internet access speed and those grades. Now, I should say that all this data are sort of corrected for other factors. So we use statistical techniques to exclude the influence of things such as income, parental education, things like this. So this is literally the net effect of connectivity that remains once you take care of all these other factors that are in play. And what you see here is that there's a clear link between the speed of connectivity and the GPA that students achieve. Now, we don't necessarily say there's a causal link, but there's a strong association between those two. Those who have fast access have indeed a 0.5 points grade point average higher grades than those who have no access, or the worst group actually are those who have cell phone access only. The reason why that group is so disadvantaged is that cell phone access doesn't offer you the affordability that you have on a tablet or on a laptop computer. So these are users who only have cell phones and don't run a hotspot to feed a tablet or a notebook computer. But cell phone connectivity creates this illusion that you are connected, although you're connected in a very ineffective way. These students also rank lower on standardized test scores. And those differences really, just to translate this into practice, right? What does it mean? The 0.5 grade point average difference typically means that you lose the qualification to get a stipend or a scholarship to go to higher education. The lower test scores frequently do not qualify you to enter certain types of colleges. So there is really a lifelong repercussion of these effects of connectivity. Similarly, we find that there's a difference in the interest in post-secondary education options as well as in STEM careers. So students who have lower access are less likely to attend college, less likely to pursue those careers. And as a result, again, the repercussion is that they reduce their life opportunities at some level. Now, how can we fix the problem, right? Fortunately, we are at a point in time where there is many federal efforts and also state efforts, some of them related to the federal efforts to address the issue. And I don't want to go through this whole list, but there's multiple programs at the federal level, including programs related to the first stimulus round in 2021. And then most recently and most relevant, probably the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act of 2021 that secured $42.25 billion for a program called Broadband Equity and Deployment that really sort of seeks to not only fix the infrastructure gap, but also address related skills and educational issues. There's programs for middle mile networks. Joe will talk more about those. The Middle Mile initiative that we are involved in. There's programs for tribal regions and areas. And then there's significant funding also to improve digital inclusion under the heading of digital equity. The state has made some money available already. Governor Whitmer has earmarked $250 million from the American Rescue Plan for broadband connectivity. Although there's certain strings attached to this program, we have received funding from these other programs, and we expect about $1.5 billion to maybe $1.7 billion from the BEAD program, from that large infrastructure program. The federal programs will be administered through the Michigan High-Speed Internet Office, which is in the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. Now, the one thing that I'd like to emphasize here is from all our research in the past 25 years, we know that the opportunities and challenges need a systemic perspective. And so what this slide wants to signal to you is that the benefits of broadband increase as we think about this more from a holistic perspective. If we only think about network device access, what we call the first level of digital divide, then the benefits are positive, certainly, because we will relieve some of those constraints that we just saw in the example of the homework gap issue. But if we also invest in the development of appropriate digital skills and literacy, the benefits will be higher. Then we have a population that not only has access to the technology, but also the advanced levels of skills. And this is an educational challenge that not only affects K through 12 students or university students, but it also affects the whole workforce, right? We need to think about upskilling and lifelong learning. And this shows you that this is not an easy problem to address, right? Because now we have to really de-silo and think across classical governmental and local boundaries and institutional boundaries to address those issues. But it doesn't end there. There's a third level and a fourth level. The third level of opportunities that we could unlock is if we also think about how we design technology, what we call in the research community uses and outcomes. So for example, the fintech application is designed in ways that is inclusive to people who are differently abled. There's numerous examples of banks in the interest of increasing efficiency and convenience moving to mobile apps as an access technology, but they forget the fact that there's quite a number of population groups, right? Think about aging people with different motor skills, for example, who cannot use these technologies. And the same is true for government websites and government portals. We have to think about human-centric design issues. Again, this requires collaboration across a broader stakeholder group. And finally, as we do this, and as we expect these technological challenges to continue going forward, think about artificial intelligence, think about advanced robotics, precision agriculture, all these things that we think will advance and create additional welfare going forward. We need to create the skill not only to use the existing technologies, but also to adapt to the always next generation of technology. Let me close by just saying that MSU as a university and other research universities across the state, we actually have a number of capabilities to help in all those dimensions, right? And we could be and we would like to be, would be happy to be partners in addressing those issues. It's a one-time opportunity. It's an all hands on deck moment. And I can only say that all hands that exist at Michigan State University is distributed across, engineering and the medical colleges, social sciences. We would be pleased and willing to help co-create knowledge. I don't think we have answers per se. I think we can bring one important perspective to the table and work with people in government and other stakeholders to jointly work on those feasible solutions going forward. And with this, I turn it over to Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes. Appreciate that. I'm not seeing any questions or hands raised right now. So, Joe, if you would like to take over from here, feel free. And you should be able to share your screen.
Whoops, can you hear me now?
Yep.
I think you and I were dueling, Arnold, with the unmute function. You were administering and I was trying to undo it, so I'm so sorry about that.
We're good.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen now if I could. Can everyone see my screen?
Not currently.
All right, how about now? All right, okay, great, thank you. Everyone can see that okay now, I assume?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank Johannes for that great overview of the state of broadband in Michigan and even, somewhat nationally as well. And I must say that Johannes and Michigan State have just been fantastic partners as we are at the, sort of the tip of the spear of fixing the broadband problem in Michigan. And I will brag for him a little bit because he's a very humble person. But that student academic performance gap study that he alluded to was the first of its kind in the United States. Everyone knew a homework gap existed as broadband wasn't always available in students' homes, but nobody ever knew what that meant to students. And for the first time in the nation's history, we've actually quantified sort of the academic impact of the homework gap. So congratulations to Johannes and team. And as was mentioned, my name's Joe Sawaski. I'm the president and CEO of Merit Network in Michigan. Prior to that, I was the chief information officer for Wayne State University in Detroit for the better part of a decade, and have been in the educational ecosystem for quite some time. So you might ask yourself, why are we here? Why is Merit Network present? And I will say my journey and Merit's journey in the broadband evolution in Michigan started in 2018 when I was honored to represent public higher education on former Governor Rick Snyder's broadband task force. It was the first time in the state's history where we were trying to figure out how to improve and enhance and expand broadband across the state. And while I participated on that task force, and we did road shows, I heard the plight of citizens all across the state, not just in rural areas, but even in urban areas, about parents who had to take their children to McDonald's to actually complete homework at night. There was one time when I was touring the state in the Upper Peninsula, and it was a winter night. The sun was setting, and as I left a local library in the Lake Chanot area, the parking lot was full of cars that were running with a lot of people inside. And I asked the director what was going on, and they said it was, these were families with students who were trying to let their students get homework done because they didn't have access at home. So that really pulled on my heartstrings, and I went back to Merit and asked, what could we do to get involved to help resolve this situation in Michigan? And I'll talk about the Michigan Moonshot project that evolved after that. But I'd like you to take a look at this map that I have here. And the project I'm going to talk about today is really represented by those blue or turquoise dots. There's about 103 of them on the screen. And remember those dots, because later on I'm going to talk about Project Moonlight and what is going to occur at those locations. But on top of this, and as you can see in the dark red and light red, if you can see that okay, these are the representations of where broadband gaps exist. The dark red is what the federal government thought were broadband gaps at the beginning of this calendar year. And the light red actually represent what ongoing speed tests show in areas that are also unserved. And that's presented by Ookla, which is one of the world's largest speed test organizations. Now, the problem is even worse because, as Johannes alluded to, the federal government this year increased the minimum standards for what is considered to be modern internet access by about a factor of 4. This map represents 25 megabits download and 3 megabits upload, and the feds have just moved the standard up to 120 or 100, depending on which program you look at. So the situation is even worse than this map shows, and that's quite disappointing for a top 10 state to be 33rd or worse in the nation relative to modern communication technology. So in 2018, I worked with Johannes to write formal recommendations to the NTIA on the value of doing citizen science crowdsourced speed test data to actually augment and refine some of the federal data that existed. As I mentioned, after the governor's broadband task force, Merit launched this Michigan Moonshot Initiative, which I'll talk about. We were involved and partnered with MSU's Quello Center on the K-12 student performance gap research that Johannes mentioned, and that is available at broadbandgap.net if you're interested. I can't overstate the importance of that study, and as we all face workforce development challenges and helping students achieve their full potential, it's essential that they have access to their educational resources while they're in their homes, not just at school. And then finally, today, we're going to talk about this Moonlight project, which is, I'll call it the first infrastructure artifact of our work together with MSU. And MSU and Merit were awarded a federal grant under the Broadband Infrastructure Program that was unveiled last summer. So some of you may be asking, what is Merit? Who is Merit? Well, Merit is not a household name, but we've been around a long time. We're one of Michigan's oldest technology companies. We're a nonprofit, independent 501c3, and we were created by the 3 research universities, I should say, back in 1966. Today, we serve over 400 anchor institutions in higher education, K through 12, library, healthcare, and governmental space. We have a simple mission. We like to connect organizations and build community, especially as it relates to technology. And we have 3 types of services. We have a triad strategy. We do networking, security, and community building and knowledge enhancement, again, especially in the technology arena. A little bit about our history. One fact I like to remind people of is that in the late 80s through the early 90s, Merit actually managed this network that the United States had created called the National Science Foundation Network. You now know that network as the commercial internet. So Merit won a competitive grant nationally, and Michigan and Merit down in Ann Arbor actually ran that national network before it was released into the wild and became the global internet. So we were right there along with Al Gore at the beginning, as the running joke goes. I would like to also highlight something else that occurred in 2010 and 2011. Merit received 2 federal grants to construct over 2,000 miles of fiber optic infrastructure across the state as part of the one of the federal programs they call the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program to help reach more anchor institutions. And some of that is reflected here on this map of our current infrastructure. So it may seem odd that a nonprofit organization has what is the envy of the telecommunications network operators in Michigan. We have a sprawling fiber optic network, as you can see. This map only represents, I'll call it the backbone of our network. We have lots of spurs that feed off of this backbone network to connect anchor institutions, higher education organizations, libraries, and governmental offices as well, among others. So as I mentioned, after former Governor Rick Snyder's broadband task force, I went back to my team at Merit and said, how can we help connect more residents? We'll never be a residential service provider, but there has to be something we can do to help this situation. So we have some really, really capable people at Merit, and we started this program we call the Michigan Moonshot, and we partnered with Michigan State University, the Quello Center, and an organization called MLab, which is one of the world's largest scientific internet speed test organizations as well. And what the Moonshot did back in 2018 when we started, we did a few things. I'll categorize those in sort of buckets of services. The first is we started doing better data and mapping of where broadband existed in the state of Michigan, because you can't manage a problem unless you can measure it, as the old adage goes. And the federal maps of broadband access were really inaccurate. They were done in a way that didn't provide the right granularity to local communities to understand where broadband was needed. So we developed a really interesting and unique citizen science methodology to have very granular measurements and maps of where broadband existed. And it's been a boon to communities. And I'll talk about who we've been working with since 2018. We also started education for local community leaders as they started to think about grant opportunities, what it would take to actually study the broadband problem and eventually to solve the broadband problem. So we created a tremendous number of community events where we trained people, we brought in national experts, and we actually developed educational material. And then finally, as I mentioned, our Moonshot program has evolved today to actually include infrastructure, which is represented by the Moonlight Project, which I'll talk about in a moment. So over the last year, as you can see, since 2019, we've been doing data collection and mapping for different, usually county organizations or groups of counties. And we're really proud to say that working together with Michigan State University, we've actually mapped about a quarter of the counties in Michigan already through our broadband mapping efforts. You can see we started with the K-12 pilot that Johannes mentioned back in 2019, the results of which were released in 2020. The first county we engaged with professionally was Washtenaw County. They did a complete county study, and I'm proud to say that that study helped launch them into additional programs, and they're now on their way to connecting every household in every location in their county with fiber optics using some COVID monies that they had available. So they were the first to actually work with us on the study, and they've made a lot of progress for their citizens. And you can see there are other counties that are following in those good footsteps. We were inspired by Quello so much that we actually created a companion research organization at Merit. And we've created a position that we call the Director of Technology Impact Research. Pierrette Dagg heads that up. She's a PhD candidate student, and she's been working closely with the MSU Quello team as well, and others. You have to put that plug in for Pierrette. And as I mentioned, the Moonshot program now has an infrastructure element to it, and that is represented by Project Moonlight, which I'll talk about now. So you might ask, what is Moonlight? And if you recall that map I showed early in my presentation with those 100 or so little blue dots or turquoise dots on the map of Michigan, that represents Moonlight. So we had to thread a needle working with Michigan State University in obtaining this broadband infrastructure program grant from the federal government and the NTIA. It was one of the first infrastructure programs post-BTOP that was made available to organizations. And we really went after that grant hard because currently in Michigan, we have a regulation called the Broadband Expansion Act of Michigan. It's also known as Public Act 224 of 2020 that prohibits educational entities and government entities from obtaining broadband grants that are released through the state. So we had to go direct to feds to try to win this grant. And I'm proud to say that back in the May-June timeframe, the NTIA awarded Michigan State University in Merritt a $10.5 million grant to build what we believe will be the first open access middle mile network in the United States. And that's really an innovative and foundational asset that the state will have on which to build other broadband grant programs. And the program itself is around a $23 million project, but Merritt is using part of its own capital resources, and that's augmented by this $10.5 million grant to Michigan State and Merritt. Our goal is to improve broadband access for underserved communities all around the state, while simultaneously helping the universities expand their research mission through technology access. We look at Moonlight as what we'll call a foundation for the state plan that other last mile projects can build off of. I've called Moonlight a digital Autobahn, if you want to think about it that way. We consider Moonlight to be the new freeway for internet access in Michigan, with all of the local projects, sort of if you want to think about those as a surface street connections directly to homes. Ours is that digital expressway with on and off ramps for the rest of the state. And again, one of the first open access middle mile projects in the United States. California is making a tremendous investment in this, and I'm happy to say Michigan is actually ahead of California when it comes to the middle mile network. So here's an area where Michigan is leading and innovating, and we really need to seize the moment and leverage that infrastructure. So those little blue dots that were on the map, we're calling those Merritt Open Access Exchange Connector sites. And why those are important is because in local communities, ISPs, internet service providers, and even cooperative or municipal networks have two basic challenges. One is to connect the homes to their networks, and the other is to connect that local network to the broader global internet. And Merritt does a fantastic job of making sure that any organization we connect to has the most robust modern connectivity possible. So we like to say that schools in the Upper Peninsula that we connect have the very same access as the University of Michigan and Michigan State. And we want to make sure that no community or student is left behind in the 21st century when it comes to digital access. So what we're allowing those local providers to do is to simply build their networks to one of those little blue dots on the map I showed, and then we will take them to large internet exchanges in Chicago, Detroit, and Grand Rapids to make sure they have the most robust connectivity possible. And that takes a big load off of these local providers. And what it allows them to do is through a unique public-private partnership model is to actually lower their project costs in those local areas and accelerate their progress. We really think this is could be an exemplar public-private partnership model, and we already have letters of support from commercial organizations and nonprofit cooperative networks across the state. So again, we feel we're providing a great asset to the state of Michigan, its citizens, and businesses and cooperative networks across the state. And why that's important for Michigan is because it will ultimately improve the business cases for these ISPs that are in local communities, for cooperative networks, and possibly for municipal networks as well. It'll provide better, high-quality connectivity for those anchor institutions that we have yet to connect, because there are still some K through 12 facilities and libraries especially that need high performance connectivity. I think Michigan's done a pretty good job in that regard, at least in connecting those anchors, but there are still some organizations left to connect. As Johannes alluded to, by providing this higher speed connectivity, we're preparing for the future and setting I'll call it a future-proof solution for residents as well as anchor institutions in the state. Johannes can speak to this better than I can. He's already alluded to the fact that better connectivity leads to better academic performance, but it's also associated with higher job growth, better incomes, higher business startup activity, and higher property values. Many studies have shown that simply by having broadband connected to a home increases the property values by 3 to 4% from the studies I've read myself. And ultimately, it's associated with better educational outcomes, stronger civic participation, and other related activities. So that's Project Moonlight. that really brings us to the conclusion of our co-presentation here. And I think Johannes and I would be happy to answer any questions that the audience might have, Arnold.
Thank you both. Appreciate that presentation and update. Certainly an important aspect of the project. I don't see any hands raised or questions in the chat right now. So again, if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand or put a question in the chat. So I might start with one. There are, and Joe, you mentioned this, there are obviously many players in delivering broadband services along the way. There's, you know, things we call the first mile. You've talked about Project Moonlight and the middle lanes, for instance, expanding that, and then the last mile, or which is the connection from the provider to the home. And as this project moves forward, I know Michigan has now established a Office of High-Speed Internet. Eric Frederick, who used to be with Connected Nation, is running that office. What is the interrelationship with the ISP providers as we move ahead, as you move ahead, and MSU moves ahead in broadening those highway lanes, so to speak, broadening that Autobahn? Are we still going to have issues with providers, especially in rural areas, who don't feel it's within their business model to effectively and profitably serve people? Whoop. I'm sorry. Hang on, Joe, you're muted again for some reason. There you go.
How's that?
That's better.
Great. I guess I'm too quick on the mute button. Again, I think we're dueling a little, Arnold. That's, sort of the situation we find ourselves in with all of these tools. From my perspective, what's great about Moonlight is it reduces some of the capital expenditures and even ultimately operating expenditures for local providers. They'll have other options, more competition. Sometimes the only option will be Moonlight in those local areas. And I think with the combination of federal programs and state programs, the business cases are actually helped for these organizations. I think the biggest benefit is these federal programs really help reduce some of the capital outlays that these small ISPs will have to make. And ultimately, that helps their long-term sustainability plans. And I know the MyHigh office, led by Eric Frederick, is just now launching and preparing their planning and engagement for local communities and ISPs. And I know Eric and the team are really, really hard at work, and that effort has just launched. And Merit has been asked to participate and meet at least monthly with the MyHigh office. So we're delighted about that.
And you both mentioned mapping as a particular issue, and there's been some frustration, I think, over the more recent years about the mapping issues. You mentioned how it's important to know what you have and to measure. What efforts are you aware of in terms of making sure we have proper maps so we know who has what and where?
Johannes, would you like to answer that one? Oops, looks like Johannes is still muted there.
Okay, now I can. I was prohibited remotely from unmuting myself. Thanks, Arnold. This is actually a complicated issue, and it's easy to get lost in sort of the weeds of the details of mapping. But let me just go back about 12 years to the initiative that led to the first broadband map in the United States, which was the response to the financial crisis in 2008. At that time, the federal government decided one of the components of better broadband policy would have to be a good inventory and accurate map. because it was crisis response, many of those programs were advanced very quickly, and some simplifying assumptions were accepted as kind of a first stepping stone. And one of those was that the assumption that as soon as one location in a census block is served by broadband, we would consider the whole census block as being served. And that's a reasonable assumption, probably in a densely populated area, because once you have one connection there, expanding it to the adjacent residence is probably a smaller incremental cost, but it's a really big mistake in rural areas, and especially in large rural areas. And we knew about this from the beginning, right? I mean, I was part of a team at the Department of Commerce at that time that looked at the data and said, here are the things that you need to fix. But the Federal Communications Commission did not get the appropriation from Congress to really improve it. So for 10 years, we have had an erroneous map. And the challenge is not just the map, but that funding programs were tied to the map, right? And now you have a compound mistake that lots of billions of dollars of funding were actually channeled to the wrong places because the map was inaccurate. And many residents at locations that would have needed funding did not receive those. So there were sort of efforts to fix those inaccuracies in the meantime, I must say, in defense of the Federal Communications Commission and others. And now we're in a crisis response situation. We wanted to move quickly, but the map still continues to be inaccurate. And so the federal level efforts currently are to build a new map. But as you can imagine, right, a new effort will have mistakes again, different ones this time. So the state is trying, all the states are trying to come up with their own maps, and we used our own crowdsourcing approach with Merit, which is a method that works very well, but it also has its own sort of limitations, right? I mean, we are very much aware of this. There's sort of, one has to be cautious with how we read the data. But I think over time, we'll have now sort of an increasingly accurate map as to where those locations are that are not being funded. And my hope is that over the past 5 to 10 years, this is a decade-long really initiative, realistically speaking, that we'll be able to close those gaps. And now, fortunately, we have technologies that can help us close the gap for those who will not have fiber optical connections in the next, let's say, 5 years, perhaps more quickly. But that's why we need to really think about that whole thing holistically, right? I mean, the map is one critical component. The state has done its own infrastructure mapping effort. We have mapped 25%. A good strategy for the state to go forward, in my view, would be to really invest in a measurement infrastructure. We have all the scientific tool, all the knowledge is here. This is now a question of really the commitment of investing in an infrastructure that will put us for the next 10 and then 20 years in a situation where we do actually know fairly precisely where those unserved households are and the underserved households are. It's not rocket science, it's more like a willingness and making the funding available. The universities of the state, for example, would be trusted partners. We would be happy to be the trusted inventory for data for the state or even for the United States, right? I mean, one of the reasons why we have such limited data is that the data is considered proprietary. That carriers actually have the data available, but there's no legal mechanism to sort of compel them to share the data. And some of them don't have the data either, so that's another issue. So I think I'm hopeful that we will solve the issue, right? I mean, there will be tussles over the next few years, but mapping is a critical component because it enables us to achieve rational policy, right? That's the best way to really stretch the available funds to the maximum, right? And make sure that we have the least cost, most efficient approach to solve the infrastructure issue.
Myself, we're starting to get some comments and questions in the chat, and I'm going to probably put a couple of them together. But I think, Johannes, you touched on something that's on everyone's mind. When is this going to happen? When is my region of the state, when is my family who lives in the UP, when are they going to see broadband connectivity. And so I gather this is not anything that's going to happen overnight. Do we have any projections as to when these various underserved areas might start to see accessibility and availability?
Well, I can just say, maybe Shoei can weigh into. I think the answer to this depends on how the state moves forward, right? I mean, so probably most realistically, or the most ambitious timeline is a 4 to 5 year timeline. Most of us think that this is not real to have service extended to everybody. Most of us think that this is not realistic given supply chain constraints and permitting constraints, but that already points to sort of some of the variables that are in play, right? There's currently many obstacles actually that are caused by our legal and institutional framework to entrepreneurship. Permitting is one issue in some areas of the state, and some places permitting is very, very difficult and time consuming. So there's places where it takes 2 years to get a permit. So anything that maybe the state could do to sort of simplify those things. Then you have conflicts of interest. In some cases, communities who really are starved for funds would like to, they need sort of other sources of revenue. So access fees to poles and ducts and so forth can be a source of income, but we have a trade-off here, right? Because those same fees make it more expensive for players to build networks. And so where do we find the balance? There are no easy answers to those questions. But my point is, right, I mean, the state could actually perhaps facilitate making these things easier, both for private providers also, and for cooperative and non-profit providers. Thirdly, the state currently has limitations on whether non-profits and publicly owned entities can build infrastructure. And it's not a prohibition, but there are sort of limitations and complications. And they're probably not reasonable in my view, because the situation of every locale differs, right? And in some cases, actually having a cooperative that already provides electricity extend the network might be that least cost solution that we're looking at it. It's not a ubiquitously workable solution across the state. There are many areas where private entrepreneurship will be the best solution, but there's really no reason why we want to keep this obstacle in place, right? So I think that the state has tools in addition to the funding to advance these causes, and I think what I said before, this all hands on deck. Let's try to find a workable, pragmatic solution that is sort of beyond sort of partisan interests, that is really working in the state's interest and the interest of its citizens. Joe, did you want to add anything?
You know, Johannes, that was great, and I will say I do believe we've done back of the napkin estimates on how much money it would cost to actually connect every citizen in the state of Michigan, and I believe we have the funding now that will come from the federal government, and funding has always been the limiting resource. You know, it compounded with business cases in rural areas, as you can imagine, less dense populations aren't attractive or sometimes don't allow sustainability for organizations. But now, with all the dollars are flowing in, I believe we can solve this problem. And if we fail, I think we failed future generations. And I agree with Johannes. It's really up to the state with this new $1.5 to $1.7 billion federal program known as BEAD. They will have the resources. It's going to depend on how they prioritize, how they engage with local communities and stakeholders, how efficiently they can make that happen. So I would say the state is playing, one of the most key roles right now, along with local communities themselves. The internet, if you don't know, is really a network of networks. There is not a monolithic solution that solves that makes the internet work. It's a lot of little local initiatives that ultimately connect together. And I think it's going to take local will, local projects facilitated by the state with broad rules expeditiously to actually solve this problem. And I'm reading, some of the comments that are and questions that are in the chat window here. And I will tell you, I'm coming to you from very rural Northwest Michigan, Marion Township, where Great Lakes Energy, the power cooperative, has gotten into the ISP business. I have symmetrical gigabit service in my home out in the middle of nowhere through the good efforts of an electrical cooperative. And while they're not the only answer to the problem, I think they play a very significant role in connecting rural residents of Michigan. And this is my permanent home. I'm in the northern regions as well. And, when I look at people in the chat window talking about elderly health care, access to government programs, tagging deer during hunting season that requires technology, those are a lot of what I'll call grand challenges. And I've heard a very wise person say that, look, broadband won't solve every problem that society faces, but you can't solve any of them without it. I think this is our moment to focus on broadband to help all of these other grand challenges the state has. And as Johannes mentioned, this is a bipartisan issue. My friends and neighbors in Charlevoix County really want this problem solved, as do people in the Upper Peninsula and other areas of the state, even metropolitan and rural. And this is our moment. And I really think it's going to take state leadership engaging with local communities to make this a priority and expedite it.
Well said, Joe. Really, really well said. And appreciate your comments and those of Johannes this morning. You mentioned the state, and for those in our audience, just so you know, the next IPPSR Public Policy Forum on September 27th will include not only Johannes and Joe, but also Eric Frederick, who runs the MyHigh Michigan High-Speed Internet Office. And so these are questions and topics that he'll, I'm sure, address during that time as well. But it's because of what Joe just said that we thought it was important today to bring you as legislative staffers information on what's taking place. You all hear from constituents in your districts about broadband issues. I last fall, as the ARPA money was starting to be distributed, I was part of a group along with MSU Extension that went around the state talking to local officials. And I'll never forget the comment of a group in the Eastern Upper Peninsula who said that in talking to residents, they heard from a retired person that they didn't know what the internet was, they didn't know how to get it. All they knew is that their grandchildren needed it. And in order to get their grandchildren up to vacation at their home, they wanted the internet. That's all they knew. And I thought that was a pretty classic story of today's society. It doesn't make a difference where you are, your station in life. If you do not have access to broadband, you are economically disadvantaged, much like you were back in the 20th century with electricity and phone and water. So I firmly believe that broadband should be considered a public utility and available to everyone. I want to thank Joe and Johannes this morning for their presentation and for their work. As I noted, if you want to hear them again, along with Eric Frederick, join us on September 27th. That notification will be going out shortly. And I also want to note, in terms of the study, that the homework gap study that's been mentioned, that is on the IPPSR website. IPPSR was pleased to help fund that study through our Michigan Applied Public Policy Research Grant Program, and pleased to hear that it's making an impact. So again, thank you to Joe, thank you to Johannes. I think what we'll do now is we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at 10:08. And we'll hear from Danielle Hook on time management. Thank you all again for being with us today. And again, thank you to Joe and Johannes.
Thanks, Arnold. I put my email in the chat in case it's on the slides too. In case you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And it was a pleasure being with you. And thanks for your attention.
Appreciate it. And as I think I noted in the chat, we will be posting and making available the presentations after today's session. Thank you again. And again, we'll return at about 10:08.
Thanks all. Bye now.
Well, welcome back, everyone, and thank you for again being with us this morning. Greatly appreciate everyone being here. Next, we're going to hear a presentation from Danielle Hook on time management. Danielle is the Learning and Development Manager with MSU Human Resources, and we're pleased actually to say welcome back to Danielle, as she's had opportunity to present before. So Danielle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Arnold. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm gonna pull my screen up here. It's a privilege to be back here speaking with you today. I hope you are all transitioning into the fall pretty smoothly. And my topic of conversation today, it would kind of mention time management, but how do we navigate high stress work environments, particularly when we have a collective sense of not having enough time, needing to do more with less, and having competing priorities coming at us from multiple directions. So as Arnold said, I'm Danielle Hook, Learning and Development Manager in the Human Resources Department at MSU. I've been on campus for about 8 years, managing learning programs, process improvement, and other strategic initiatives. And this topic just comes up as a baseline for all of that other work that I do. People need to understand and find ways to tailor their work in a way that helps them manage too many demands for the time that we have. So I'm hoping to talk to you about some tactics that might help you think about ways to approach adapting your work style in a way that's useful to you. So we'll get started. I'm also happy to take questions if those come up. I will say that what we're going to talk about today is not just a one-size-fits-all solution to time management, but more so a whole variety of options, because what I've come to understand is each individual has unique talents, strengths, ways of thinking, and challenges. That means one solution does not fit everyone. And while one tactic might be a great solution for one person, it might be the last thing that someone else needs. So instead of offering one recommendation, I have here a collection of different things for you to consider based on what you know about yourself, your work team, and your workplace priorities. Okay. So I want to begin with a reflection question. We're not going to share these out, but I want to give you about 30 seconds here to just take a moment and reflect on what causes you stress in your day-to-day. Are there particular moments, individuals, events that occur? Think about this, jot that down. I'll give you a moment here to think about that. Some of you may be thinking this is never enough time to think through all the different things that add stress to our lives, but really wanting you to think about those big ones, the ones that really set the tone on your day-to-day. Okay. So when we think about what is stress and stress related to being unprepared and unaware of what needs to be done. Grace, that's great. Yes. So if we're putting these in the chat, I would love to see what some of those things are that cause you stress. Don't feel compelled to share if you're not comfortable doing that. But yes, if you're willing to put that in the chat, I'd love to see some of those responses. Some of those things are within our scope of control. Some of those things may not be. Oftentimes, the things that cause us the greatest stress are the things that are not within our control. But that's a great example. Thank you. And when we have our body receiving stress and we're under stressful situations, our body responds in multiple ways. There are mental, physical, emotional, and behavioral manifestations of that stress. And I think you can all understand what some of these things might be for you personally. But this slide is just to suggest that there's much broader implications to our body responding to stress than maybe we are comfortable with or aware of in the first place. We can identify some general stressors. Professional demands and personal demands come to top of mind, but as each of you are kind of whole individuals, there is a lot more to it than just that. Major life changes, dynamics and relationships, competing or mounting responsibilities, finances, trauma, all of these different elements of who we are and how we experience our life day to day can add layers and layers of stress in different ways. Okay, so these come at us from multiple directions. I really love this diagram because it suggests that a certain degree of stress is actually useful to us. So what you're seeing here in this green section would be if we have too little what is defined as stress in our life that's considered underload, and that may cause us to be too laid back or too inactive, and having difficulty to engage in the work. Optimum stress is this yellow section where there's enough stress to move us into action, but not enough to fatigue, exhaust, and overwhelm us. And that sweet spot can be very difficult to find and maintain, where most people lately, in what I'm hearing, finding themselves in the too much stress or the burnout section, this orange and the red. Too much stress actually decreases productivity. We feel overloaded, exhausted, fatigued. And then if you move into that red space, this is what we would consider burnout. There is such an overwhelm of stress that the system just kind of breaks down, and we're not able to be productive and apply that motivation in a way that's meaningful. This can also result in anxiety, panic, anger, behavioral manifestations of that stress and burnout. And so really the goal is to acknowledge that stress is useful to us to a degree, but find out a way to mitigate it so that it is only keeping us within that optimum stress space. And when we slide into the red and the orange, or we slip into the green, being able to recognize that and find our way back to this yellow space. And then there's this concept of resilience. What is resilience? You all probably heard this term and have different definitions for it yourself. I like this definition. Resilience is the capacity of a system, enterprise, or person to maintain its core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. That term, dramatically changed circumstances, I think resonates with a lot of people over the past 2 to 3 years, and our processes, our work systems, our understanding of who we are within the community has changed and has been challenged in the face of what's come in the past 2 years. And so resilience is our ability to bounce back, our ability to absorb those changes in a way that allows us to adapt productively. And resilience takes practice and effort and intention. Okay. So how do we build stress resilience? Understanding that stress is coming at us in multiple directions all the time, but having the resilience is such an important skill set. I offer a few suggestions here, just really generically. Being able to identify and recognize sources of stress is a very starting level tactic. If you can recognize it, you can put a name to it, you can find a solution to help mitigate that stress. I think people who have trouble identifying the sources of their stress but are very reactionary also have a hard time managing and mitigating those factors. Engaging in social support is very critical, especially we've seen in the last 2 years where folks have tended toward isolation. Re-engaging with social support is going to be a key component of that mental and physical health. Changing the perspective. Sometimes we need to look at a problem or a situation from a different perspective, and that can actually have an impact on the stress load that we receive from experiencing that event. Mindfulness, this is another buzzword in the internet ether these days, but practicing mindfulness techniques that work for you, and these vary depending on who you are as a person and what you enjoy, but trying to give your mind space to take a break, relax, and rejuvenate. Self-compassion, being kind to ourselves, prioritizing your own needs, setting boundaries. We'll talk about some time management tools, the importance of communication in building stress resilience. There can also be really high benefits to physical activity and actually physically working the stress chemicals out of your body. A change of scenery can do wonders, and writing or list making for some folks, offloading some of that out of the cognitive space can be a really useful activity in terms of relieving the body of some stress. Okay. Are there any questions or comments for me at this point? So here's where we move into the collection of tactics. And I've tried to group these things by what is the core issue or the source of the problem of your time management challenge. So when someone says to me, I'm struggling with time management, there's generally, we can break that comment down into a more specific source of a time management issue. We may be talking about time management, process management, task management. Time management as a general phrase is a collective feeling. Is actually usually broken down into more specific elements of what is occurring or not occurring in your workspace that's making it difficult for you to navigate the responsibilities at hand in a timely manner. So I've broken these down into different categories. Within each category, I have quite a short list of suggestions or tactics that I've seen individuals have success with in the past. I'll do a high-level overview of each of them, but if you have questions on them, please stop me and we can go into more detail. For task management, this is exactly how it sounds. How do we intake, triage, prioritize, and then execute and track the completion of our work-related tasks? I understand that as legislative staff, the technology available to you varies depending on the team in which you work, but most of the main systems, the Google suites, the Microsoft suites, have tools that have similar functionality. So things like Microsoft Planner, this can be a really useful task management tool that allows you to set up project boards, assign tasks, responsibilities, due dates, color coding, or phased and categorical systematic ways of approaching your tasks. And so rather than thinking that you have to manage all of this within your head, let's get that task list out in a way that it's within a tool that helps us manage them more objectively. A Kanban board may or may not be something you're familiar with. That's the example you have in the picture on the screen. And there are multiple ways to do a Kanban board, but essentially you're taking tasks and categorizing them into to be done, in progress, complete, on hold, as a way to visualize what's moving. And you can then move kind of sticky notes. They have those, is a virtual tool as well, but also if you're in person, sometimes having a physical Kanban board can be really useful because you can just see and tactically experience yourself moving around your tasks and where they belong. Checklists are remarkably helpful. If anyone's read the Checklist Manifesto book, you have an understanding of the way checklists can transform effectiveness and accuracy in the work that we complete. This can also just help remove some of the time management related stress by offloading the memory responsibility into a tool. So then we're not feeling responsible for remembering every single step along the way. A checklist actually helps us do that without having to maintain that memory responsibility on our own. Also, scheduling tasks. If you are someone who uses a calendar and you're not yet scheduling work to do the work that you're supposed to do, the common phrase is that I'm in meetings and then I have tasks out of the meetings, but then I'm in more meetings, so I can't do the tasks. One way to kind of take control of that is to build in task-specific time on your calendar. And I'll talk about this when we get to time management as well, but finding and dedicating time so you can focus on one particular task at a time can actually be really beneficial in completing things in a more timely manner. So think about tasks. How do we know what they are? How do we prioritize them? How do we track their completion? And also make sure we're not forgetting things, because when tasks are coming at us in multiple directions, it can be easy to drop a ball or to forget to make note of something. And then we're letting down our customers, our teams, our partners. Okay. Questions on task management? And there are other tools, but the idea is to have something, have a system, whatever the system is that works for you and how your brain works and what your preferences are. The suggestion here is to find something that helps you manage these in a more intentional way. And if you're working within a team, a way to share that across the team can also be a benefit. Moving into time management, this is really related to task management, but what I find particularly here at MSU, a lot of folks are subject to their time is dictated by what their calendar suggests, but they're not using their calendar in a way that optimizes their time. Rather, they are being given time mandates by other people who put things on their calendar. So here's an example on the screen here of someone who's really using task management within their calendar to ensure that they have time throughout the day to do the things they need. I also understand that some of the work that you do may not give you the space and the privilege to dictate your own schedule all the time, but where you have pockets and space to do that, I encourage you to dedicate time to specific types of work. So this is an example of calendar tools. Here we're scheduling task and email time. One of the things I hear often is that because the meetings are occurring so much during the day that we're spending time in the evening checking emails, responding to emails, sending replies, and doing some of that independent task work. And the suggestion here is to actually build in that time on your calendar. So here in the blue, you see focus time. You have some purple items, which are actual project meetings. You have lunch written in here and breakfast and some of the personal things that would occur after work. I also have seen people successful with a 1 hour in the morning for just email, calls, and replies. So dedicating time so you have that focused area also can help you prevent yourself from having to be reactive all day long to your email. While I know some roles require that reactivity, it can also be very distracting for us. Schedule focus time. If you're a person who has a lot of strategic thinking strengths and you need time to really focus in on one task at a time to dig in and do deep work or find the idea of flow, where you really need to dig in and focus on one thing at a time, and you're not finding the time to do that, try to schedule it on your calendar, find some space if you can make time. At this point in my career, I look 2 weeks ahead, and if there are gaps on my calendar, I grab 1 to 2 hour blocks wherever I can for project work, because then I suspect that at that time, most meetings that would pop up have already been scheduled within that time frame, and I'm safe to grab remaining gaps for myself. Schedule breaks. The work doesn't work unless you're taking care of yourself. So make sure we're eating, exercising, taking a step away from the computer. And if you have to schedule that on your calendar, do it. Using a timer. This is another tool that is really helpful, especially for folks who find themselves in a more neurodivergent approach to work. Having a timer that dedicates 15, 20-minute chunks of time to one specific task. The idea behind that is also called monotasking. Using a timer can really help us get into work-related sprints where there is a deadline and we're actually focused on something, but we know that that time is coming to an end. So there's a motivational factor to get as much done as you can within that space. Organization systems are going to also help you use your time more effectively. Here you have this color coding system for the calendar using green, purples, and blues to indicate different types of meetings. This can be helpful so you get more of a heat map of what your time is being spent on. Also physical organization systems, where are you keeping paperwork, where are you keeping notes? How organized you are in that way is actually going to save you time as you're trying to access those materials and resources to get the job done. Another quick tool is writing tomorrow's to-do list today. So give yourself a launch pad in the morning by remembering to do that this afternoon. What do I have to take care of tomorrow? Where is my head at? Where are my priorities focused? So when I get in the morning, I know where to begin working instead of having to reset, reevaluate, remember where we left off the day before, and then develop it at that point. You can really help yourself get a great head start by remembering and thinking about that the day before. Questions on time management? I'll just acknowledge it is also a privilege to have control over your own calendar, and sometimes our work environments don't give us that flexibility. But if you can find pockets here and there, it might be really useful to consider how you utilize those pockets. And if you're all working in an office, if you're physically around one another, what can often happen is those 1 to 2 hour breaks throughout the day, if they're not intentionally coordinated, we lose that time to conversation and the hallway, the water cooler conversations, and the people dropping in, and that work is also important, but you want to be sure you're not giving up too much of your time to someone else in a way that's not serving you. So this is one way to approach that. Another layer that I see often in folks and teams who have trouble with time management is actually a process issue. So process management is both a necessity and a difficult body of work. So process management in my mind, and I have a diagram here, process is kind of that high level activity that occurs for us to take one input and turn it into an output, or collect an input, a request, a need, a deliverable, work it through the process, and turn out something that is expected of us. The procedure is more of the specific how to perform those steps within your tasks and within your process. The work instruction then goes into even further detail. So when I say process, I mean the collection of these 3 layers. You may all have different understandings of this, or maybe the documentation in your area is non-existent. Maybe you have high-level processes documented, but not the work instruction, or maybe vice versa. But when we think about process, I'm kind of referring to both what is the flow of the work and what is also the step-by-step detail for how we accomplish it. What also comes up with process is that it requires work on the front end to document process, but if you spend the time up front, it pays off over time. So documenting processes is a bit of an effort, but we see kind of an ROI on that as it's utilized in the future. So documenting processes and work instructions, making resources, these documentations accessible to yourself and to your team. They need to be current and up to date so that they can be reliable. Having processes documented allows the execution of those processes to be repeatable. So repeatable means one individual can execute a process consistently over and over again. This also allows for reproducible processes, which means more than one person can complete a process in a consistent manner, which also helps us kind of have continuity in our deliverables and our work processes. Process can also help us clarify expectations. I think there's a lot of time loss when expectations are not clear, when we have to go back and rework, or we're coaching other people because what the deliverable was did not meet our expectations. Outlining a process as we prefer something to be completed communicates those expectations inherently. So that can also just save some time with the idea of rework and aligning expectations if those aren't clear in the beginning. This can also help us streamline training and onboarding. Time loss can happen when you are coaching a neighbor or working with a partner or training a new employee on the team on processes that are happening within our systems, our tools, our work processes, and maybe our paperwork and documentation. New employees want and look for concrete, clear, detailed work instructions as reference for them to kind of onboard into the processes. They don't want to have to ask for help, but if they don't have documentation to refer to, they are left to have to work with others on the team, and we're kind of cross-training, and cross-training takes time. So I encourage you to think about process management as a tool to help you save time in your own life, because you're then putting out your knowledge and information into documentation that others can utilize without you having to be present to explain it. If that makes sense. Okay, processes enable us with more time for creativity, more time for other types of work, less time focused on executing and demonstrating process to other people. Questions? Okay. Another layer to how we manage our time is how we prioritize. We're bringing in a whole collection of information, tasks, requests, needs. We have competing customers or competing stakeholders. Sometimes it can be hard when that's flooding in to know where to begin or where to focus our time. If you're a person who is looking for or is in need of prioritization techniques, there are many out there. Here's an example of one. Some kind of system that helps you sort and organize all of the tasks. And we can tie this back to our task management slide, where we have a way of mapping out and tracking our tasks. So sorting and organizing them, identifying competing demands. This can be a response to that idea that you're drinking out of a fire hose, or just bringing in so many requests at once, an intake that you don't know where to begin. Prioritization helps us focus on one thing at a time and also know what that one thing should be. And then by knowing what one thing to work on at a time, we can move into the concept of monotasking, which I'll explain in a moment. The diagram on the screen is Eisenhower prioritization matrix. There are many iterations of things like this, but the idea is that you take your collection of tasks, and for each task you identify, is this urgent and important? Is this important but not urgent? Is this urgent and low importance, or not important, not urgent? And then you have, by identifying those four categories, am I doing it now? Am I doing it later? Am I setting it aside? Am I delegating it? And there are ways to then track how you complete each of those based on the category they're in. There's also another kind of popular approach right now that says, if you can do it in 2 minutes, do it now. And if you can't, make a list and do it when you have time. And there are many of these. You need to find the one that works best for you, but finding a prioritization approach can be really helpful, and also can help take some of that decision-making off of your plate. Also, teams can do this collectively, and that can be a really useful team building exercise. When I talk about monotasking, and this may be a term you've heard recently, the idea is that you are removing distractions, turning off email notifications, Teams for a dedicated amount of time. I think a general monotasking sprint is 20 minutes. And in that time, you are only focused solely on the one item at hand, the one task that needs to be done right now. This is sort of the reverse of multitasking. We're not taking in and managing many things at once, which many of us are conditioned to do. I imagine in your work environment, multitasking is an expectation, but you'd be surprised if you can spend 20 minutes monotasking, how quickly you work through important tasks that are hard to accomplish while multitasking. And there are some tools and resources available for how you might do that. The Perdomo method is also an approach to monotasking, which suggests, again, we're taking 20 minutes, setting a timer and doing nothing else but that one thing. Then you take a break. So prioritization helps us understand where to focus our time. Kind of foundational to all of these concepts is communication. Communication can be a tool for us when we're in a situation of time management, crunching, and challenges. We are going to use communication to establish and maintain boundaries. We're going to use communication to establish expectations, to clarify expectations. Communication can be a tool for us to clarify the work at hand, the why behind the work. We're going to use communication effectively to ask meaningful questions, to understand exactly where we're headed with things. Communication helps us connect to purpose. Ideally, as a team, we're working toward a common shared goal, and sometimes we need to connect back to our purpose to help us prioritize and know where to focus our time. Communication will also help us with intentional reactions. So trying to maintain relationships positively. How do we react when people bring work to us, or when our work environment changes, when expectations shift? Having some effective communication skills can help you navigate those moments of volatility in a way that is productive. Also, communication is going to be values guided. So if we're speaking within our team or with customers, partners, team members, are we speaking in a way that highlights our support and our shared understanding of why we're here, what are we aiming to accomplish, and again, connecting to that purpose. So we have a purpose-driven approach to our work, and that can be a tool for prioritization, right? If things are not aligning with the goals that we set out to accomplish, is it work that we need to be doing in the first place? Okay. Communication can also inhibit our ability to use our time productively. If we're not communicating effectively with our partners and our team members, you just actually add work and add stress to each other with situations. So communication and communicating respectfully and effectively in theory would help us save time and move forward more quickly. The other concept and this is something I'm hearing on the internet a lot right now, your 5 to 9. So everything we've talked about so far would be things you would apply in your work day. So your 9 to 5, even though who works a 9 to 5 anymore. This concept is, there was a recent study, I believe it was published in the New York Times. What you do outside of your day-to-day actually has significant impacts in how you feel about your time management and your stress management at work. So people are calling this your 5 to 9. So think about this like your 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. And what can we add to our personal time that adds and creates value? A lot of times when we're suggesting or stating that we have a high degree of stress, we are not having enough time to get the work done, burnout is occurring, finding more fulfilling activities in our personal time can actually mitigate and counterbalance the negative feelings we're having in our workplace and have positive impacts in our engagement at work. So prioritize fulfilling activities in your downtime, things that really fill your cup, so to speak. Intentionally embed joy. Little tiny moments of joy every day can actually have a resounding impact. We can't always travel to mountaintops on a day-to-day, but there are small things we can do, knowing yourself and knowing the things that bring you joy, finding ways to engage more with those when you have the time. Reclaim your free time. And if you have the ability to do this outside of, family and other responsibilities and restraints, can you find moments throughout your day, throughout your 5 to 9 to really focus on the things that you want to do and spend time on? Start small. This isn't a suggestion that you maybe go out and spend an hour doing something every evening. These things can be as simple as 10 to 15 minutes every evening with some type of activity that you enjoy, whether it be reading, exercise, whatever it may be. Regular physical activity, this speaks back to the stress component. Physical activity just has so many positive impacts. In this case, having some exercise or some time outdoors can really pay off in the long run. Embark on many adventures, right? Find some way of having more awe in your personal life, because that's going to then counterbalance the burnout we're feeling in our day-to-day at work. Get outside. There's a lot of research out there about the positive impacts on our physical being when we are outside in nature. If you can find a way to do that, that can be beneficial. And leisure is important. I know we all have very long to-do lists and a high degree of priorities, but finding time to be you as an individual instead of you as a professional and doing the things that you enjoy has implications for your professional self as well. So where to begin? There's a lot of suggestions here. Now, I don't expect any of you to pick up any one of them immediately and have it transform your life, but to begin on this journey of how do I regain control of my time, my stress, my tasks, it begins with an awareness of personal need. So what is your personal work style? What are your strengths? What are your external pressures, your triggers? Think about you as an individual and within the context in which you work, and try to identify, is there low-hanging fruit? Are there particular items that are specifically stressful that may have easier solutions to implement? Because if we can start to tick some of those off the list, then you open up time and space and mental capacity to think about the more challenging problems. What are the pain points? If you think about any given work week, what jumps out to you as the stickiest point, the most difficult piece to move past, the most stressful trigger? Those might also be a place to focus on solution building. Caregiving of family members, an enormous responsibility and source of stress, also source of joy. As the mother of a 2-year-old little boy, I have so many comments on that I will refrain from sharing, but yeah, yes, absolutely. Team collaboration. This can also be a team discussion. So if you're beginning to have this journey by yourself, but you also know you as a team are struggling with common things, these can be great discussions for staff meetings, for team building. What are you collectively experiencing? And are there tools you can implement as a team to help everyone with a common problem? When I talk about work style too, I don't know if you all have had access to tools such as StrengthsFinder or DISC, but there are a lot of assessment-based tools that can really help you understand what's my work style, what are my motivations, my behaviors, and through those assessments, generally there are suggestions given for providing more awareness of self and awareness of individual needs, preferences, patterns of thinking. So if you have never explored any of those, I encourage you to check them out because they can be really transformative in how we understand ourselves and our needs. I believe that's all I have for suggestions. I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Anything I can elaborate on. I appreciate the time. This is such a large amount of information to share, but and each one of the items, I think every bullet point would be an implementation project of its own. And so it's hard to really narrow in on one specifically, but do you all have any questions or comments for me?
Greatly appreciate the presentation and information, Danielle. Certainly, as a former legislative staffer myself, I know how unique the positions are that these people occupy, the constraints, the pressures, the demands on their time. And so I know that your information, as we can see by the thank yous, is being well received. And again, this presentation will also be available after the session. One of the things, that I have a question about, and this from my own personal experience, and please, if anyone has a comment or question for Danielle, I'm sure you can contact her individually, but I'm also sure that whatever one might be facing, others of your own colleagues are facing as well. But you talked about the 5 to 9, and I know what I've come to learn is that even if I can get 10 minutes between tasks, I have learned to get up out of my chair on a nice day, get out of the office and walk around. Now, I admittedly am in a great setting on campus, so there are many areas that I can go to kind of escape, so to speak. But can you talk for a minute about the importance of just taking those 5 or 10 minutes during the workday to gather yourself and breathe?
It's so important. I think we really underestimate the power of those, I almost call them kind of micro breaks, or those, like I said, the 5 to 10 minutes where you get it are going to build energy. They're going to give you what you need to sustain yourself through the day. And I am someone who will find myself 6 or 7 hours into a workday and I haven't taken a sip of water. I forgot to eat. It's just like going. And by the end, I physically, mentally have nothing left to give. And compare that to days where I take a lunch, where I take a walk, where I step outside into the sun. I am giving my mind an opportunity to have a break. And I think those small moments have a much greater impact than we might consider that they do. And if you haven't tried that, the structure of having a break every hour, every couple of hours is designed that way for a reason. And what you do in that time may look very different for different individuals. Some people like to just get on the phone and check social medias, or step outside, or go say hello to a friend. Again, that's knowing yourself and what's going to fill your cup the most. I refer to myself as someone who photosynthesizes. I would get energy off of the sun. So if I can just step outside and enjoy some sunshine for 5 minutes, that's going to make my whole afternoon better. And try to strategically place those things throughout your day. If you have an opportunity to step outside before a long block of meetings, you may find that you have an easier time engaging in that meeting, sitting through it without being as restless, because you've taken a chance to step away and collect your thoughts and reset. So it's so important, but so easy to skip over when there's just so much at hand. But the idea is taking that time actually gives us more benefit, more opportunity to be effective in the time when we do come back, as opposed to a constant with no break. You're kind of just burning out over the day, and that's not effective.
Great advice. Can you also talk for a minute about the simple act of learning how to breathe?
If anybody has one of those smartwatches that tells you when to breathe, those can be really useful. But yeah, breathing. And that's actually a very, if you've done any sort of yoga or exercise, you have maybe heard about the importance of different breathing techniques. And breathing can help us in a moment of stress to step back and have a moment of clarity. It helps reset our body. If you're breathing, actually, if you are under a stressful situation, if you're stressfully activated, taking slow and deep breaths signals to your body in a very chemical way that you're safe, and can help you bring yourself out of that stress response. So definitely there are multiple triangle breathing techniques where you kind of breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 6, and other variations of that cycle. But it is actually a lot more powerful than I think we give it credit for. Also, focusing on breath is another technique that allows us to ground ourselves and signal to our body we're safe, we're okay, we're not in imminent danger right now. And how do we then reset so we can engage with the work meaningfully? Because if we are in an activated stress response, we're just not going to be as effective in our work as we could be.
Do you have any advice for those that are working on a hybrid schedule right now about the balance between being in the office and being at home? And for some, I'm sure that when they're home, there might be kids around, so on and so forth. Can you just talk for a minute about that balancing act?
Oh, is it really a balancing act is the question I'd ask. It's hard. I, again, mentioned I have a 2-year-old, and over the past 2 years, I've had multiple days working from home where he's been out of daycare. And I think one of the challenges is adjusting expectations. If you find yourself in a work from home situation where you're also caregiving, to just accept that you're not going to be able to do both of those things to the full extent as you normally would if you were doing one at a time. And how do you adapt expectations? How do you communicate with your team that maybe my response time is going to be delayed? But what I found just personally is trying to hold myself to both of those expectations, to be a fully engaged mother and a fully engaged employee at the same time. I was just setting myself up with expectations of failure, and that can be very difficult. So if you're in a space where you can adapt that, I think there's this challenge right now where we expect that because you can work from home with a kid that we are supposed to just do that the whole time. And that's not really realistic either. Now, if you're not dealing with the childcare issue and you're just kind of bouncing back and forth between home and in a workplace setting, one thing I've been asking my team about is what do you do while you're working from home that brings you joy? And can we do anything like that in the days that you're in the office? So for example, my team may be having more elaborate, healthy lunches while they're at home because they have access to their kitchen and they feel that they're missing that when they're in the office. So can you bring things with you? Can you set yourself up for a day in the office that still affords you some of those privileges you have while you're at home, while you're in the office? And also, I like pack my bag the night before because I don't know how many times I've forgotten my mouse when I'm switching back and forth. If you have the privilege to set up your space in both places with what you need, so you're not carrying materials back and forth, that can make the transition a little bit more smooth. Checklists for people who want that memory jog. But it is tough. And I think a lot of us are just learning right now what this is like and what the best practices are. And so if there are any other suggestions, I'd love to hear those, but it's definitely tough. Definitely a tough situation that we're all in.
I actually do better at eating when I'm in the office because when I'm at home, I'm eating all the junk food that's in my house. So I like I said, I actually do better when I'm in the office. I'm not seeing anything in the chat or hands raised. Does anybody have any of your own advice, maybe that you've come upon a strategy for yourself that you might want to share with folks about dealing with stresses? I know, especially working in the legislature, in a legislative office, over the next few months during campaign season, and at a time when we have a lot of term limited legislators as well, might bring a high level of anxiety to staffers. As I said, having been there myself many years ago. But anyone want to give their thoughts or any advice of their own before we let Danielle go on with her day?
Yes. Michaela, your comment about not having the same resources, the same privileges, neurodivergencies. Yes, we are all, I think one of the things that makes teams so effective is that we do have diversity within our teams, and we have to also recognize that, appreciate that, and also make space for individuals' competing needs or preferences, because not everyone works the same way, and that's okay. But how do we make that adaptation so people have what they need when they need it? Yep.
I also know that, legislative offices typically have two people in them. And I do hope that you're all reaching out to your colleagues, whether it's on your floor or wherever it might be as well, and establishing those inner networks. I know when I was on staff, whether it was on the central staffs or in the offices, wherever, wherever I could, I made sure that, I reached out to colleagues across the aisle as well to talk about various experiences, because you always find that those experiences are actually pretty similar to office. So, the advice and strategies that one might get from others is always important.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, I want to thank you very much, Danielle. Again, you've been very well received. I think you're going to continue to be on our rotation, so to speak. Staff changes a lot in the legislature, and it's just always good to hear your words and your perspective and your advice every now and again as reminders, because we all need these reminders as to how to cope with the times and the stresses in our work day and in our life. So I want to thank you very much for taking time from your day. Again, Danielle's presentation will be available after today's session. Great comment, Elizabeth. Yeah, give yourself some grace. Give others grace as well. I think that's been really something that I have focused on as well, especially over the last couple of years, given situation. So again, Danielle, thank you very much, folks. We're going to take a few-minute break. We'll come back at 11 o'clock. And we'll hear from Jeff Beavers on resume writing and interview tips as well. So stick with us, and we'll see you at 11. Danielle, again, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
Your participation is obviously greatly appreciated. And again, I want to thank our partners, MSU Extension, the Office of Government Affairs, House and Senate leadership, and the work of the House and Senate Business Office in bringing this together today. Now I am pleased to introduce Jeff Beavers. Jeff is the Executive Director of the Career Services Network at Michigan State University, and he has more than 20 years of experience that spans career services, global talent acquisition, and recruiting technologies. He's also served as a professional career coach and consultant for early career professionals to senior executives. At Michigan State University, he oversees career education, recruiting services, and employee relations for the campus. Very pleased to welcome Jeff to this session. Jeff, thank you for making time with us today.
Thank you, Arnold. It's great to be here. We also appreciate the opportunity to share expertise and help those who have invested time this morning on the call to help with a potential career transition or advancement. So I want to also ensure that we have an interactive dialogue here. So I do have some slides prepared, but I want to encourage anyone who has questions along the way to raise a hand. We'll stop and answer those as we go through to make sure that you're getting the information that you want. And if there are questions also entered in chat, I will ask Arnold to help me monitor that to make sure that I don't miss those as I'm doing the presentation. So let me start the screen share now. And I think we're all set there.
We are. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. So as we go through this, I'm going to give you a number of key tips, and I'm going to show you some examples of best practices here. As Arnold already mentioned, I've spent a number of years heading up talent acquisition at various companies, working with technologies, doing hiring, and I'm sharing with you really, I would consider some HR secrets in some ways that will help you hopefully gain a competitive advantage as you are thinking again about advancement, promotion, or transition. So first I want to talk a little bit about the online profile. So what I find is that when a lot of individuals begin that search, they focus on the resume and other documents, but maybe they forget about that online presence and the LinkedIn profile. So I want to start with that and give you tip number one, which is market yourself for the job you want, not the one you have. So what happens is that a number of individuals will use that about section or summary section within LinkedIn to describe their past. Here's where you really begin to differentiate your qualifications. So focus on the relevant skills and describe what you have for the job that you want next. So it may include some highlights from your history, but it also should include transferable skills that you will be bringing to the employer going forward. That's the number one here in terms of the number one bullet. Secondly, don't think of the LinkedIn profile as your resume. This should really just be an area where others, and including HR managers or recruiters, can go and I think explore your summary of qualifications, your employment in a quick way, but it should not be a replacement for the resume. So I caution you on listing for each of your entries all of your accomplishments and responsibilities. Instead, summarize in one sentence or two, maybe for each of your entries, what was your area of focus? What was a key accomplishment? Or what was a primary responsibility? So essentially tease them into wanting to talk with you to learn more. If you put everything in the LinkedIn profile, you essentially are allowing them to do an assessment on you without really ever having a conversation with you. So our intent here is really to use that LinkedIn profile to create enough interest and curiosity that they reach out to you regarding that next step. If your organization or employer in the past is maybe a little known entity, maybe you're working for an individual or an organization that is maybe not familiar to individuals or organizations outside of this area, but you're applying for jobs outside of the area, you may want to also add a short description. This is true also if you're working for like a small startup or maybe a nonprofit organization that is very focused. So providing a 1 to 2 sentence description is really helpful, and potentially even including a link to that particular organization's website for them to learn more information. The other thing I find is that when individuals are applying for jobs, that they, in their LinkedIn profile, fail to show authenticity in that interest. In other words, if you are applying for a job with an organization, are you indeed showing genuine interest by following them and connecting with them on LinkedIn? So most organizations anymore, corporations or others, have a profile on LinkedIn. And the question is whether or not you have started following them so that they're in your newsfeed. Are you liking things that they are posting, or are you commenting or sharing or resharing content? So this was always an area when in my past, when someone would say they really wanted to work for my organization, that our recruiting team would look to see if they indeed were so committed to wanting to join our organization that they were doing their part to research us, to keep abreast of news, to really understand the organization in detail. So this is one of the first ways that I think a lot of organizations, and especially those that use social media screeners, are culling out individuals that they think really are not authentic or genuine in their interest. You'll also want to be sure that you know the organization's leaders, maybe if they have competitors, if they have a stock price, office locations, because this was the fastest way to trip people up when you did have that conversation about why do you want to work for us, or what do you know about our organization? And if you haven't done that research, and the expectation is that they're going to tell you all of this, they again discount the fact that you probably are not really interested, that you are conducting a job search but are not sincere in your application to that organization. All right, number 2 here, I want to highlight and help you identify and leverage your competitive advantage. So what I'm sharing with you on this slide is research that has been conducted for years globally by Lawmonger International. It's a Korn Ferry Lawmonger research study in which they have identified skill sets among senior managers, executives, and those who are rising into those roles. And what they're really looking at is supply and demand of talent and skills. And these are the skills that come up as really providing you with a competitive advantage. So let me help you understand what this chart means. So if you're a manager level, so someone in maybe that 5 to 10 years of experience, and that executive level, maybe more than 10 years of experience, the L, M, and H means low, medium, or high in terms of availability or supply of talent, or you can also think of it of the volume of applicants that typically have that skill. But also what's noted in the red boxes is the red boxes indicate that it is a significant determinant, or it is an indicator of success in a role. So let's take the manager role. So creativity, a lot of individuals apply as managers to various manager level roles, but the amount of creativity that most applicants have is low, or at least they have not demonstrated or indicate that in their application materials or maybe interviews. At the same time, creativity at the manager level is an indicator of success. So the more creative you are in bringing forth solutions and in solving problems, you will find that you have a competitive advantage, because they will be talking to a lot of other people and interviewing in interviews or reviewing a lot of other resumes that lack that qualification. Same with motivation of other people. So how do you maximize the performance of a team? That too is oftentimes when you are thinking about the manager level, that individuals who are rising to that level have been primarily individual contributors. They maybe have not supervised teams. So what they are looking for in terms of that hiring process are individuals who have maybe had some unique experience in motivating others that maybe didn't even report to them, but were on a shared team or were part of an organization or unit and were able to do so in maybe an indirect way. When we look on the executive side, then dealing with ambiguity, especially when we think about COVID, that is a medium supply, but it is high in terms of its direct correlation to success. Again, creativity carries through. Innovation, I somewhat align this with creativity in that innovation and creativity are somewhat related or closely related. But you see again that a lot of leaders bring forth some strong business skills and business management skills, but that innovation side and creativity side is generally an area or that is a gap in their skill set. And then the bottom one there, managing vision and purpose. So again, no surprise, an executive is really expected to lead the vision and purpose for an organization. And the question is, when have you done that in the past? Because they find that a number of individuals that are vying for some of those key leadership positions do not have that experience in the past. And it's very important to the organization and to that individual's success that be present. So think about, as you are preparing your application, as you are highlighting skills in your online profile and in your resume, what are some of these areas that you truly maintain a competitive advantage in the application process? Because you can see also in that second column, developmental difficulty, that organizations that hire individuals that have a gap, you can see that some of them, especially dealing with ambiguity, is very difficult for an organization to train you on. So they're going to really be assessing individuals who bring that skill because they know it is difficult to put you through training courses or coaching or mentoring to develop that skill, or in a way that is at the speed that they need it. Let me pause there. Any questions so far with what I've covered? Okay, next we're going to go on to telling a compelling story. So you've probably all been asked, tell me a little bit about yourself. Or maybe, again, this is referred to as the elevator speech. And depending, I guess, if you're working in a high rise, one of the few, I guess, in the Lansing area. But if you are in an elevator and you meet someone new, in 90 seconds, are you able to tell a story in a compelling way? So the question is often answered with a complete historical background where there is limited relevancy of the information being shared. In other words, when I ask this question in interviews, I often get individuals who ramble for 3 to 4 minutes about their background and who have failed to think about what would be really compelling to me as the audience, as the recruiter, as the hiring manager. So what is it specifically in your background that you want to highlight that you think has been key, instrumental, has been influential in your interest in the role that you're pursuing, in the industry or the sector that you are involved with, or that you think has created a unique skill set that would be very difficult for me to find someplace else? So again, in 90 seconds, you really have to be able to highlight your career history in such a way that it's logical, that when you go from one transition to the next, how do you connect the dots? How do you make sense of the fact that maybe you took a detour in your career, but you did so in a way that it has provided you with a unique skill set that others do not have? So maybe it was a little bit of an indirect route to the job that you're pursuing, but in taking that indirect route, you have gained some experience and skills that few others will have. And then how, again, will that benefit the target employer? So don't stop at, I just want to tell you about myself. Let me tell you about what I've done specific to the role to which I'm applying and how I think I can really add value at your organization. So really practice this in 90 seconds. because that is the time that you really have to get buy-in from the listener as to whether or not there really is a strong match or an interest in learning more and in a curiosity to explore you further. Next, let's talk about the resume. So I also find that a lot of individuals think that the best approach or strategy for pursuing a new job or applying to new roles is to use the quantity method. Let's push out as many resumes as possible, and surely something will hit. I guess my challenge back to you would be, let's think about what do you really want to pursue, and let's invest that time that you spend hitting the submit button and focus the resume on the job you really want, so that you actually are more successful in landing that targeted role. And you will actually end up submitting fewer applications in doing so, but you'll be investing more time to align that resume to the job you want. So let's go through this and what this really means. The first tip here that I've listed, the highlight the keywords in the job posting, is important. So what I would do is encourage you to either take a job that you've already identified that you want to apply for, or find something similar on Indeed.com. It doesn't have to be exactly the location or the organization, but let's say that you've identified a job title or a role or the type of role that you want, and maybe print that off and get a highlighter out and go through that job description and highlight keywords or phrases. What are qualifications that are required? What are some of the key responsibilities? What are terms that they've used? So do they refer to things like, do they use the word customers or clients? Do they make mention of vision, purpose, strategy? And highlight again any of those things that you think are especially relevant or noteworthy. Next, take your resume and also have a printed copy and place that next to the job description that you just highlighted. And now look for those same keywords in your resume. Highlight those as well or circle them and try to identify the gaps, and then ask yourself, is there a way that I can potentially add content that I have failed to include or forgot about, that this has jogged my memory, that I can use and adopt some of those keywords? Can I potentially rephrase a particular sentence so that it more closely matches what's in that job description? Maybe the way that you described it is similar but not exact. What you're really trying to do is create very strong alignment to that job posting. Keep in mind that the hiring manager likely was involved in writing that job posting. They know what they want. And so if your resume is speaking that same language, the likelihood of you making a connection as they're reading your application, your resume, is going to increase significantly. I'm going to share with you, there are several resume formats and templates online. I'm going to share with you what I think is preferred, and I'll tell you why as I go through it. A lot of individuals will start with a profile summary, which is professional, and there is a lot of merit in that. At the same time, there is a lot of subjectivity often in that profile. So the question is, if you are including that as a resume kind of preface, and that you are leading with that at the top, have you thought about how much of what you were including is subjective versus able to be documented or quantified? So I like this format because it gets to immediately your summary of qualifications and it quantifies it. More importantly, here's where you have the first opportunity to align your resume directly to the qualifications and requirements of the job. If you can take that job description and the requirements and the qualifications and draw a line again from that job posting to your resume, you essentially are telling the recruiter, hiring manager, or other person who's reading your resume at the very beginning that you have what they're looking for. And that basically you've summarized everything that will follow in the resume. So this is a real trick of getting them excited and getting buy-in from them that you are ready for the role and that you are well qualified for the role for which they are seeking strong candidates. I've also listed here, adapt for each application. So as you are thinking about that summary of qualifications, that should essentially change every time you apply for a job. It is unlikely that two jobs have the exact same summary of requirements or qualifications listed in their job posting. So this is an opportunity for you to tweak that every time, to think about the alignment that you have to each job and to get buy-in accordingly. I also recommend then, secondly, following that up with skills highlights. So again, in a professional profile, often these are in a paragraph form. Listing them out in this format or in columns allows for a much quicker review of those skills, and again, allows you to use a lot of the keywords that may have been identified in the job posting. There's a second reason to do this as well. So if you are applying to online systems, you may be aware that many corporations have made a switch in recent years to technology systems and software that reviews applications using computer algorithms. So when I used to post jobs, I would include the job posting, but then I had the option to tell the computer what 25 keywords are important to me in a resume. And if an applicant had 12 of the 25 in the first 500 words of their resume, to kick that out to me as a candidate that I should review. So essentially what they've done is they have replaced a lot of the manual screening of resumes with computers that are looking for keywords that often are pulled from that job description. That's your hint of what they are. And by you including them in the skills highlights and the summary of qualifications, you are increasing the likelihood of the computer recognizing you as a qualified applicant and will kick out that resume for the hiring manager, the recruiter to review. So it's a little bit of a trick, but at the same time, what you are continuing to do is get buy-in from the individual who is reading the resume to say, you have the summary of qualifications and skills, and I'm going to continue to read now, where have you gained those experiences? This next section, depending on your situation, you can call it employment history, but I would generally suggest you avoid the word employment history because that is very limiting to only paid jobs. Think instead might be a title might be relevant experience or related experience. Because then if you've done things with nonprofit organizations, volunteer activities, or maybe projects that maybe were not part of your employment, you have the opportunity to include those in that relevant experience section and to bring those to the top. You can think about if also you have maybe some employment in the past or some experience in the past, generally it's employment that you want to account for because it's necessary to show that you don't have gaps in your work history, but maybe it wasn't directly tied to the job to which you're applying. You can create another section down below that is called additional experience. So the trick here is that you are trying to top load your resume with as many relevant experiences in employment as possible, and anything that is less relevant, pushing that more towards the bottom of your resume. So you can see here that maybe an administrative assistant job, I want to highlight the fact that I had that in the past, but the job to which I'm applying is looking for someone who's more in terms of a strategic thinker and team leader, or someone who is more adept in maybe marketing or a different role that maybe this is more loosely relevant. So I want to include it on there because I want to show there's 2 years that I don't want to have a gap in my work history, but this pushes it down. All right, I see. I'm going to pause it for a second. I've got maybe a couple questions here. How important is the one-page rule? Thank you, Michaela, for asking that. It's important for an undergraduate student or someone with less than probably 3 to 5 years of experience, but beyond that, there really is no rule. I would think that probably a lot of you who are on this call, a 2-page resume is absolutely appropriate. And if you're in that 10 to 15 years of experience, you may even get to 3 pages, but 3 pages generally being max. So almost think about a page for every 5 years with a max of 3 pages. All right, let's continue on. So below your experience then becomes your education. So education only appears at the top of a resume when it is the most recent and significant accomplishment. In other words, if you are not currently employed and you are in a graduate program or pursuing a degree, that becomes your most recent and relevant accomplishment. And so your education appears at the top. But for anyone who's currently working or employed, their professional experience should be at the top and the education gets pushed below that. You can think about whether or not you want to include the dates. It depends on if it's recent, you may want to include that. But if it goes back too far, I would encourage you to probably leave those off because you want to avoid their ability to potentially create an unconscious bias or actually a conscious bias around your age. Similarly, you may not want to include all of your experience. You may only want to go back 10 or 15 years. So you want to put on an adequate amount of experience, but you don't want to allow them to try and calculate the fact that you may be nearing retirement. Get them excited about your background and try to avoid any potential bias that may come with age. You're right, Daria, a lot of algorithms and do want specific dates in the application and online. And that is true. That is used for verification of employment. It is not necessarily seen by the recruiter or the hiring manager. Oftentimes, they are only reviewing resumes. But what you fill out in the online application is what is used for the background check and the screening to verify that you do indeed have that degree, and they need to contact the institution and know specifically when you got that degree so that they can verify. All right, so that's the middle section. Let's go to the bottom section then, is where you can list additional leadership and community involvement. So again, these may or may not be related. If they're related and significant, they probably should be up under your relevant experience section. But if it's more that you just want to share how you were involved in the community, how you are taking leadership roles in other areas, you can list those there and continue to add them. Similarly, at the very bottom of the resume, I include an additional information section. This is important because if you look at a heat map of recruiters' eyes, where do their eyes go when they're reviewing a resume? So they look at that summary of qualifications at the top, but one of the other primary areas that they look at is this additional information section or the bottom of the resume. Anyone want to take a guess as to why they also look at this bottom just as much as the very top? No guesses? Well, it's because if you think about recruiting, it's a relationship-based, holistic view. Yes, I mean, that is part of it. What they're really looking for, though, is a way to build rapport with you, to break the ice. How do I think about you beyond just being an applicant? How do I also get to know you as a person? How do I build rapport with you so that When we have that call, I can say, oh, hi, Jeff. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm excited about your interest in our company. Very interested in your qualifications of your resume. And I got to tell you, I couldn't help but notice that you're also a bogey golfer. Same with me. I really struggle. Do you golf here in Lansing? What's your favorite course? What I'm doing is I am getting you warmed up for our conversation, and I'm starting to identify things that will help me remember you as an applicant beyond just your previous employment. So now I'm going to remember Jeff's also a bogey golfer. Jeff is a scuba diver. Maybe that's something interest there. So think about, this is where you introduce personality as part of the application process. What are some unique things that you can include here? You've probably all been in icebreakers where someone says, introduce yourself to the team and share one thing unique about you. So for me, I always share my two go-to ones just for fun are I'm related distantly to Elvis Presley through marriage. And my second one is I've not set an alarm clock in 26 years. I've never used a wake-up call or an alarm clock. I use sleep cycles to manage my sleep habits. So similarly, it's like, what would I remember about you and get excited about you that would introduce, again, some personality as part of your application? So Daria asking about fitting into that company culture. That probably is not as much done on paper as it is through the actual interview process and the assessment process that happens in person. But there could be certainly some, depending on, especially if you have included anything that might appear as, or might create, again, an unconscious bias. So be careful about putting anything that is maybe too controversial, that potentially could introduce an unexpected bias or a bias that certainly you would rather not be included in that process. Same with your LinkedIn profile. I always think about LinkedIn being a professional summary of kind of your skills, your qualifications, and your background, and leaving more of that personal interest to Facebook. So if your LinkedIn profile includes a lot of personal ideation, it has a lot of, I guess, personal interests or biases, be careful about including too many of those. We obviously want you to represent your whole self, but at the same time, you don't want to be excluded immediately from a review or from a discussion with an employer because of maybe something that was included that created an initial bias, maybe just by the recruiter. Maybe it's not a bias for the organization or the hiring manager, but for the individual who was assigned to review your profile. So you just want to be careful and cautious about that. All right, the cover letter. This too is something that you're going to want to make very specific. I can tell you, and I review a lot of cover letters. In fact, I was just reviewing 19 earlier this week for a job that we are looking to fill here at the university, more of a senior level role. And what happens is that a lot of people just start to regurgitate everything and write paragraph after paragraph about their background. And I can tell you as a recruiter, I generally only went to that if the resume was compelling. So I looked at that resume first, and then I went and would review the cover letter. But there is an opportunity for you to use the cover letter to your advantage. And let's talk about how to do that. So the first is that you need to make it specific to each company and each industry. If you're using a template that you are simply changing the name of the organization and using that same one, you are doing a disservice to yourself in the application process, because you have failed to create, again, an authentic or compelling reason for that employer to pursue you further, because they can see through the fact that you have not really thought about why specifically this role at our company at this time. So let's talk about how to do that. So one of the things you want to do is think again about the skills and experience that you have relevant to the position. And again, just like we did in the resume and I talked about, address some of the specific requirements or qualifications, or highlight a significant accomplishment that you think really underscores your ability to achieve extraordinary results. Something that would cause the recruiter to say, aha, this is a great candidate. I'm going to show you some more here in the next slide, but as you think about the cover letter, here's another trick for you. So whenever you're sending off a resume and cover letter, do not send them as two attachments. Always combine them in a single attachment when you are sending them by email. So if you do have a personal contact, you have a recruiter's name, you met someone, you have their business card, and you're sending off that resume and cover letter, combine it into a single attachment. You are probably just like them and you're very busy. And anytime you get an email that has multiple attachments, you're a little bit overwhelmed and maybe you just skip over it. So make it really easy for them to open that attachment and get both of your documents at one time. If you're applying online, oftentimes it will upload cover letter, upload resume. Well, again, if you think about what happens for a recruiter standpoint and what I just shared with you earlier, I generally would download the resumes and would look at those, and then I might look at the cover letter. But if you have taken the time to really customize the cover letter and to think about the competitive advantage that you offer or the key accomplishment that you think really underscores your ability to be successful in the role for which they're hiring, make it the first page of your resume. You can also include it in the cover letter section, but make that cover letter the first page of your resume so that they always will get that information along with your resume. No one says you can't include the resume or the cover letter with your resume. You're just taking an additional step to ensure that they really do understand how you have thought about your fit with that organization. And again, especially that job function. And then also when you do that, make sure when you are sending the attachment that maybe you write resume and cover letter of and your name. Don't put September resume or the XYZ company resume or organization resume, because lots of people will do that. So if they save that, forward that on, your name is in there, and it's much easier for them to find, remember, especially if they maybe save it to their desktop or open it up. So a little bit of trick, because again, when I start saving those, if I find and if I receive, especially by email, resumes, I might create a folder and I put the resumes into them. And you know how many people have the same title for their resume? Fall 2022 resume or September resume, and then I now have to rename it. So this is just a little trick of making it really easy for the recruiter to save your qualifications. So let's talk about a preferred resume format here too. Again, this does not have to be lengthy. This does not have to be paragraphs, because a lot of recruiters, based on the volume of applications they likely are getting, unless it's a senior executive job, is probably pretty high, and they don't have time to spend reading paragraph after paragraph of an individual who has basically just summarized their resume. So the trick here is to, in that first paragraph, say, here's the role that I want, and maybe even include the job number, so that they specifically know or recognize what job to which you're applying and who the recipient of your resume and cover letter should be. So if I receive your resume and I'm not the right person for that job number, I can look it up quickly on our company's internal applicant tracking system. I can see that Arnold is the hiring manager, and I can forward your application to Arnold. You've made it really easy in the first line of your resume to figure out whether or not I am the intended recipient. Secondly, what is it about your previous background in terms of maybe scope or quantify the scope of experience that you have more than 5 years experience in strategy and vision development, in writing and grant writing, or whatever it may be. And then you want to finalize that statement in that paragraph with something that is compelling. I'm especially interested in joining your team, joining your organization, because. And if that is not specific to their organization, so if you just say for its strong reputation for excellence, that could apply to 1,000 organizations here in the Lansing area. So what is it about, because of the fact that you have worked with colleagues directly who have indicated their extreme satisfaction for the challenges, rewards, and opportunities that the company provides? Is it because of the fact that they have won an award for something specific around innovation and technology? So think about, what is it that really entices you to want to work for that organization, and be genuine in that. And then we go to that second section, that middle section, which is, again, oftentimes it could be similar or could be the same almost as the summary of qualifications in your resume. But maybe you want to highlight something here that maybe they say that they're looking for someone who has, I'm going to use grant writing again, who has maybe done some grant writing or has managed $2 million in budgets, or who is outstanding in relationship management. And maybe you have some of that in your resume, but maybe you want to restate that here to make sure, because you saw how important it was and how many times it was listed in the job description, that you also want to underscore that experience. And then in the final paragraph, it's just indicating how to follow up with you and to indicate that you are thankful for their consideration and want to thank them in advance for reviewing your qualifications. All right, any questions about the resume or cover letter to this point? Don't see anything in chat, so we'll keep going. Arnold, was there anything you had?
Yeah, Jeff, I'll ask it now. I was going to ask it later. So the folks on this call are legislative staffers, and as legislative staffers, they might undertake a number of different duties, whether it's talking with constituents, talking with the media. Some of them may have testified on behalf of their legislator in front of committee. Some of them may have even been involved in writing legislation as well, and talking with lobbyists. Where within the resume might you include that under additional information as part of your skill set? How would you incorporate that into a resume?
Well, good question, Arnold. I'm glad you did mention that. And I know you did prompt me that a lot of them here are legislative staffers. I've just been trying to be inclusive in case there were not, because I don't know the backgrounds of everyone on the call. But let's start with this, that if you know, let's say that there are 3 or 4 primary buckets of skills or experience that you have in your role, you may want to take your role. I'm going to go back up here to, excuse me just a second. I'm going to go up to, I'm going to use this one, Michigan State University job. That maybe you, so your title is legislative staffer. And then under that, you may want to create 3 or 4 categories. So instead of having 15 bullet points, maybe you have 3 buckets in which each one has 5 bullet points related to writing legislation, relationship management, of I think you mentioned a few other areas like testifying, or maybe it's in I don't know if it's, maybe it's supervisory staffing. Maybe there were other people that they were responsible for in the organization that they were supervising. So think about, again, from the job posting, what are maybe those key skill sets that they're looking for? And you could create some subcategories within your experience section to really draw those out and to put those in. At the same time, let's say that you've got you've stayed in the same, working for the same leader for, maybe it's been for 10 years, and you've had 3 different roles. But generally, the scope of your responsibilities, even though your titles change, have been similar. What you can do here, instead of having 3 separate entries on your resume, is to create a single entry and list all 3 titles consecutively underneath that title of that particular office or organization or leader for whom you worked. So in this case, we could say, I'm just going to use an example because of this one, administrative, let's say it was senior administrative assistant, and then administrative assistant, and then maybe it was clerical staff. And those were my 3 roles, all within the same organization. So I would list all 3 of those and I would list the dates. Then I would break out and categorize in these buckets my responsibilities around, again, technical writing, communications and marketing, outreach, campaign management. So think about, again, how would you maybe categorize in 3 or 4 buckets your scope of experience, and then put the bullets underneath there. So that's a little bit of a trick. Instead of repeating what you've done multiple times, and then I have to, as a recruiter, try and add all of that up or look for it or categorize it myself, and sift through 15 bullet points. That's an easy way of really keeping that experience aligned to the job to which you're applying.
Thanks, Jeff. I see we've got a question in there too. What is 1 or 2 of the biggest no-nos that you see most frequently?
I don't know if it's the no-no, but I can tell you one of the biggest ones that is always coming up is the lack of attention to detail. And everyone says they have it, and they fail to have someone else review their resume because oftentimes all caps are not effectively managed in spell check. And so unless you've clicked that button to review all caps, it doesn't. Also, I often see people who have applied for jobs and they have used the word manger instead of manager. And both of those fly through spell check. I've also reviewed a resume that someone was applying for a public relations role and left off the L in public. That's a true story. And if you think about that's probably a nightmare for that public relations organization, for someone to not have spent more time being certain about what they were writing. So the number 1 is not having someone proofread it. And maybe it's multiple people proofread it, and making sure that spell check is on for the all caps. The second is when the resume has so many distractions in it that there's a lot of content that's not relevant to the job. They've listed things that would never be part of a responsibility of the job for which I have. And it's because they have generally used the same resume repeatedly, and they have not thought about what is really relevant. The resume should be a marketing document. The resume should never get you the job. The resume should get you the interview. So think of this as really a marketing document. Think of it as a campaign flyer. Tell me why I should tune in to learn more about this particular candidate. Tell me more about, maybe highlight their position on some key things, but then I should want to go to a website to learn more. It's the same thing if you think about the resume.
Yeah, that was a great analogy.
All right, we're going to wrap up with some interview tips here. So as you, again, thought about how you're targeting yourself for that particular role, the next thing I want to do is, after that resume gets you the interview, want to ensure that you are ready for the interview. And we're going to go quickly through this as well in the final minutes. But generally, companies are using behavioral interviews. About 90% of organizations do. I'm not as familiar with, the smaller organizations, nonprofits. It could be other legislative staffing positions. They may or may not use this. But in any case, this is an effective way for you to describe your experience that will excite them, and for you to, again, differentiate your interview answers with that particular recruiter or interviewer. So generally what they think about is a bucket, again, 7 buckets actually, of categories of skills that would be necessary to be successful. So there are many ways to slice and dice these, but these end up being the 7 most common. Again, they may have some different terms that different organizations use, but generally these are it. And so I'm going to talk through them really quickly. Leadership is not just about a title. It's about when you have sold an idea. So if I ask you, what's the best idea you've ever sold? That's leadership. In other words, it's your ability to influence other people, to gain followership. So when have you maybe not been the most senior person on a project or in the room or at a table? And when were you able to get buy-in from others to go along with the idea that you had? This could be also when you introduced something that was a new way of doing something, and maybe where you were met with resistance. How did you overcome that resistance and influence other people to buy in and go along with the idea? Secondly is teamwork. This one, again, seems like it's pretty basic, but it's really not. It's really about when you are a part of a team, what role do you typically play? And how do you define your contribution to that team? Why is a team better? Because you're on it. Do you recognize the strengths of other people on the team and try to be inclusive to ensure that others' voices are heard? Are you someone who really is very analytical, or maybe someone who takes great notes, and so you always try to play the role of documenting the discussion on that team, because you find that a lot of teams, if that's maybe a weakness and people forget, or their assumptions are made, or there's no follow-up, or there's inconsistency in the way notes are taken. So what is the role that you play on a team, and why are teams better because you're on them? Communication skills are about how do you take into account the audience as you are preparing communications. So you know that when you are writing an executive summary for a legislative leader, or if you are writing a reply to someone in the community or another constituent, that you may approach that differently because you've thought through their expectations. Do they want a summary? Do they want detail? Do they want explanation? Do they want bullets? Do they want paragraphs? Same in a PowerPoint presentation. Have you thought through that audience? So that's really about ensuring that you are adapting your communication style to the intended audience. Commitment to values and ethics. So this is really about your commitment to ensuring that whenever you are presented with a situation where there may be conflict in values, that you maintain those values. One of the questions that I often would ask when hiring individuals would be, give me an example when you had to bend the rules in order to be successful. We've all been there when we had to shortcut something. We maybe missed a deadline. Maybe it was supposed to go through a level of reviews and approvals and sign-offs, and maybe you skipped a couple of steps. But did you do that because of the fact that it was in the best interest of the organization? That may be bending the rules, but when you answer that question, you also want to think about, what did you do to ensure that you never found yourself in that situation again? Did you plan differently? Did you update a process? Did you go through an approval process to eliminate some steps, to get rid of some bureaucracy? So think about how you ensure that you are maintaining your commitment. Applied intelligence is something you've learned on the job and able to apply in various settings. It could also be something that you have done on your own. Maybe you have taken a course, done some certification in some way. Maybe took a course at Lansing Community College or an online course through Coursera, and now are using that in real life. So think about, if they hire you on, you're probably not going to know everything, and there are going to be some things you're going to have to learn. And I want to know, if you learn those things, are you able then to apply them easily in a setting, a professional setting? Problem solving skills, this goes back to creativity. What's the toughest problem you've ever solved? And demonstrate creativity and innovation in doing so. Is the way that you solved it probably what I would have expected? Then that means that I can probably find 10 of you. But if you were surprising in the way that you solved that problem, and you are more creative and more innovative, that goes back to what we talked about in that Lominger research, that now creates a competitive advantage for you. And then lastly, initiative. What's the one thing you've accomplished in your job that no one else can say that they've accomplished? Maybe many people have held the title that you have currently, or maybe they do currently in that organization. What is it that you've done that is different from everyone else, or different from the way that it was done before? On this list, there are 3 that are very difficult to train someone on. You either come to an organization generally with leadership and influence skills, with initiative, and with a commitment to values, or you don't. Teamwork, communications, problem-solving skills you can be trained on, but you're going to find that, again, that leadership and influence, initiative, and commitment to values are what organizations will want you to bring, and they will want strong evidence of that. So as you are thinking about interviews and your examples, think about ways that you highlight those, because those are difficult to find and even more difficult to train. Let's talk about then, as we wrap up here, the format for those interview responses. So if you know behavioral interviewing, or if you don't, there's what's called the STAR format, which is when you respond to an interview question, you use the situation, task, actions, and results format. So the situation and task is just ensuring that you are giving me an example that is recent and relevant. Don't go back 10 years. Then it's not a behavior, it's an incident. It was a happenstance. It was a coincidence. I want to know that this is something that you are regularly solving for or doing, that it's truly a behavior. Then you want to go into the summary of actions that you've taken to respond to the particular situation or the challenge that was presented. Think about I. Most people use the word we. We're very humble in doing so, but it makes it very difficult for a recruiter to figure out whether you can do that on your own or you need a team of 5. And then finally, when you talk about results, don't list one. Most people stop at 1. This is the shortcoming. This is one of the biggest faults, is they say, well, what happened? I got 500 new signatures on this particular petition. That may be the case, but what I really want to know is, tell me about the other results that became of that. Well, as a result of that petition, we were able to introduce new legislation that was passed in record time. All right, now I have 3 significant results. These are extraordinary. So think about examples, again, where you can give multiple results and not a single instance that may limit their appreciation for what you accomplished. If you're scoring that, it looks like this on a 5-point scale. There can be 10-point scales, but essentially think about that situation or task is worth 1 point. Those actions are worth a couple of points, and your results are worth a couple of points. And companies are going to be looking for individuals who consistently score 4 or a 5 for every question. So when you're thinking about those answers, make sure that you are giving enough thought to the results, and especially to the actions, because those are where points are generally lost. As I wrap up here with tips 6, 7, and 8, you've got some opportunities here to even prompt yourself and to make sure that you don't forget some of your best examples. When you go into an interview situation, place a portfolio on your lap with your resume there. Write a few keywords on your resume that will remind you of some of your best examples of teamwork, communication skills, problem solving. When you do phone interviews, I'm going to encourage you to dress up, not just from the waist up, but all the way up. And then you stand up when you do it, and that you stand in front of a mirror. This will help ensure that you are being very professional, articulate, and that you are showing enthusiasm for the interviewer. And then lastly, if you do have a portfolio of examples of your work, of where you have letters of accommodation, recommendation, have maybe individuals who have praised your work and your accomplishments, you may want to include that and bring that to an interview. That just adds credibility for what you are sharing as examples in the interview itself. This is truly a differentiator. Maybe 3% of individuals who show up at interviews have brought examples of their work. This is where icing on the cake, and this is what again creates authenticity in what you're sharing. So we have gone through this very quickly. I think I've used all of my hour, but I'm hopeful that you have taken away a few aha moments, and you're better prepared to support your career transition and advancement. So thank you, Arnold, for the time today. I very much appreciate it.
Jeff, the thank you goes to you. This was very, very insightful. Wish I'd had this advice about 40 odd years ago. But this was great stuff, and I'm sure that our attendees appreciated very much your advice and perspective here today. And I appreciate you taking time from what I know is a busy schedule to be with us this morning as well. I am not seeing anything in the chat or not seeing any hands raised, so I'll assume for the moment that folks are probably ready to go out and enjoy what might be one of the nicer fall/summer late summer afternoons. Thank you all for attending today. I do hope that you've been able to gain some insight with our presenters into what we talked about today, all the way from broadband to working in stress environments and time management, and finally to Jeff's presentation on resume and interviewing. Thank you again to MSU Extension and our Office of Government Affairs for their assistance with these sessions, and certainly again the support of the House and Senate leadership and the work of the House and Senate Business Office staff in putting these together. Again, thank you all very much. This is again our final legislative staff training of 2022. Presentations will be made available in the next day or so, and we'll send those out. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great weekend.